you go. So, Robbie, I am going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, you, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I see people are still joining, but as we're doing that, I mean, the topic today is high impact boards. And obviously in an hour, we're not going to do a deep dive into every single aspect of board governance. And the presentation, as we have created it for today's program, touches on the primary accountabilities of nonprofit boards. And in particular, because I feel so strongly about it, the governance committee and the role of the governance committee in creating a high impact board. But before I do the screen share and we miss the opportunity to chat with each other, I'm curious about two things. Are there topics that unless we talk about them, you will feel your time today was wasted? Or the opposite, if we talk about them, you'll think it's something you've been hearing about forever and you're sick of hearing about it. So with the size group we have, I'm happy to have you raise your physical hand, start talking, use the reaction hand if you prefer that. Any things on your, if we don't talk about it today, you will feel this hour was not helpful to you or your organization. It's tough to be the first person who talks. Jamie's smiling. Is something on your mind, Jamie?
Not really, just lunch.
Okay.
No,
Robbie,
looking forward to the presentation.
Robbie, in the chat, Vincent wrote suggestions how to engage board to become more active.
Thank you for monitoring the chat. I failed to do that. All right, Vincent, we'll talk about that.
Thank you. And thank you for this presentation today.
Oh, you're welcome. Other things that you really want to make sure we talk about? How about the opposite? You're so sick of hearing about X. If we talk about it, you're going to log off. Ellen, you unmuted, but I'm not hearing you.
No, now she's muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I have a new computer and my configurations have been terrible. I apologize. I'm new to all of this. I'm sort of a more recent joiner to a board. So I'm just here today really to kind of absorb and learn, and wanted to just kind of engage with your organization just to see what maybe I can bring back to my board and bring to the table here going forward.
And are you willing to share which board you joined?
Yes, the Meals on Wheels of Chester County.
Well, thank you. So I want to flip to Vincent's question right away. I think part of the secret of having a really engaged board is to make sure they're recruited the right way, with the right understanding and expectation of what governance really is. In my opinion and experience, most human adults in their day jobs don't get to govern or strategize. They implement tactics for people who they work with or for, who are at a level of the company or firm where those people are setting strategy. So they are implementing tactics. Most of us never, ever get to govern. And I hope I won't offend anyone because I think I'm simply stating something that is accurate. Well, first of all, I started in the nonprofit sector in 1975 working for the Girl Scouts in upstate New York. At that point in the US, there were about 250,000 501c3 nonprofits in the United States. Anybody got to guess how many there are today? If we were face to face, I would have tacky little prizes for anybody brave enough to guess. But since we're not, I don't have any tacky little prizes.
I'll say a
Anybody
million.
willing to guess?
1
I'm
million.
sorry, Ellen, how many?
1 million.
Little on the low side, actually a lot on the low side.
Wow.
But thank you for being brave enough to guess. You would have gotten an amazing prize. Anybody got another guess? It's almost 1.8 million. So in the course of my professional career, we've gone from 250,000 501c3s to 1.8 million. Okay, so let's go back to 75 or 65 or 55. Who were on the boards in the United States?
White men.
Exactly. And they took that work extraordinarily seriously, and they trained their sons and grandsons, nephews and great nephews to be amazing members of the philanthropy sector. It was part of their family DNA. So if we've gone from 250,000 to 1.8, then for better or for worse, and I think it's for better, we have much broader boards with much more diverse constituencies. But as a result, they didn't learn governance at the knees of their parents, grandparents, uncles, whomever. The other thing that I think is huge in our culture is, as adults, I don't know about you, but my life experience was never admit to other grown-ups what you're not good at. Now, that doesn't mean you have to pretend to be good at stuff you're not, but don't admit out loud you don't know how to do things. So what happens when you get recruited to a board and you're supposed to govern and strategize, and what you know in your day job is tactics? Now, you may have to plan the optimal way to implement those tactics, but it's still tactics. So you're on a board and you're told to govern, and then you're accused of micromanaging operations. Well, yeah, because that's your wheelhouse. So when people like you participate in a workshop like this, what I like to think about is dividing the work into lanes. I fear that oftentimes we put them in silos, but we can't have silos. Silos, I didn't grow up on a farm, but I grew up in the Midwest. Silos are sealed. You can't see out of them. Lanes, I grew up in Chicago. There were lots of lanes on our expressways, not like the Schuylkill with 2 lanes and a breakdown lane. But even with the Schuylkill, the board's got 1 lane, the staff's got 1 lane, there's a breakdown lane. Sometimes we're both in the same lane. Strategic planning. Yeah, it's a board document. The board has to approve it. But at the end of the day, a strategic plan won't be very successful if it's not the voice of board and staff and consumers. So we've all got to be in the same lane for some stuff. Micromanaging operations, board needs to get out of that lane. Advocacy, philanthropy, board and staff need to be together in their respective lanes, but traveling at the same speed. Sometimes one or the other group is in the breakdown lane, so you got to pull over and figure it out. But I think one of the reasons that boards struggle and people struggle with engagement is because they don't know how to do it, and they don't feel safe to say, I want to support this mission, but I don't know how. So when somebody like you participates in a workshop like this, and then takes the recording back to a couple natural allies on the board, don't show it to the entire board. Take it to the people who have begun to see the need for this, and let them work with you to expand awareness. So, Vincent, I don't know if that answered your question at all, but in my opinion, the best way to engage people is by recruiting them transparently, helping them understand the difference between governance and operations, and then supporting them on their learning journey.
Thanks, Robbie.
Does that make
helpful? That is helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody who's joined now who wants to say, if I don't hear this topic, I'll feel cheated, or if you talk about this, I'm logging off because I'm sick of it? All right, well, I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. I am the kind of person who likes to be interrupted with questions So if you're comfortable doing that, I'm very comfortable being interrupted. And I'm going to depend on Hugh to look at the chat so that we'll know if there's anything in there. So obviously the November election has changed a lot in this country. And in addition to what's on this slide about what's new, boards are talking about will there be and what will be the impact of the change of administrations. Obviously, this is not a deep dive into that, but depending on your focus, that probably is a significant conversation going on. The charitable giving landscape, in my opinion, began to change after 9/11. And after 9/11, baby boomer donors, who are still a dominant cohort, but at the time were the dominant cohort, baby boomers shifted their giving behavior from giving to as many as 20 organizations on average to focusing their giving on as few as 5. And that has not changed. The number of actual dollars in the United States has continued to grow, but the number of people giving those dollars has not. So there's an interesting dynamic going on. And with the changes of the tax law in 2017, donor advised funds became a more important tool for donors to use in their philanthropy, but also in their tax planning. And as baby boomers age, the focus on planned giving has become even more emphasized. Ironically, some of the research says that once somebody retires, they're very unlikely to change their estate plan. So planned giving has to start before people are, quote, old enough to need it. But at the same time, when we think about the impact of government, board members with different commitments in their lives, and it's not just busier, in my opinion. As we go beyond baby boomers to X and millennial and Z, they want to be engaged with their volunteer enterprises differently. So it's not just busier, it's different. And the entire awareness that unless you have involved your consumers in your planning, you run the significant risk of doing the wrong work. That, in my opinion, is huge and critically important. And I think a lot of organizations struggle with how to engage consumers of their services in planning the work. It's not hard, but you have to be willing to have conversations with people on their terms when they're available. And demanding voice, yes, but why don't we welcome the voice before it's demanded of us? So I think those are certainly considerations. So are you going to be Superman or Wonder Woman? I hope so. But at the same time, if your board is not constantly looking at its level of effectiveness, you're probably stagnating or stale. So why do people serve on boards? There are a dozen reasons. Some of them, of course, are I want to build my resume. I want to network with other people who are concerned about the quality of our community. You would hope that one of the primary drivers is a commitment to your particular mission and the community you're serving, and that the mission is consistent with your values. But unless you have really good due diligence and vetting conversations with the people you're onboarding, you're never going to know the answers to that. In my opinion, it takes at least 4 months to identify a good candidate to serve on your board. Whatever your discernment is, maybe you're talking to retired board members, maybe you're talking to members of the Chamber of Commerce, maybe you're talking with clergy and congregations, especially if you're a faith-based organization. Are you talking with business leaders? Whomever you're discussing, if you were me, and I'm on the board of the Housing Partnership at Chester County. I happen to chair the governance committee. We're just about to onboard a new board member. Our conversation with that individual started last October. I have a conversation with the person, seems to go well. Then 2 other members of the governance committee meet with the individual for coffee So they've now met 3 of the board members. We then invite the candidate to shadow a meeting. Some organizations, because of the nature of your work, are uncomfortable with that. But if your board agenda always has an executive session possible, you can do the non-confidential stuff first and excuse the guests. So there are absolutely ways to do this. So this particular individual shadowed our meeting last week. I've now had a follow-up conversation with the person to say, how did it seem? Are you interested? They are ready to go. Next, we have board orientation. Whether we're orienting 1 or 5, we do a 2-hour board orientation, not staff-led, board-led, where the entire executive committee and all the committee chairs conduct the board orientation. Once that's done, we do another check-in. Once that's done, then the name comes forward to the board. Now, obviously, they've all met him because he shadowed a meeting. So it's not a mystery, but that process is not, oh my word, the annual meeting's in a month, we've got to fill 5 slots. And that process goes on all year round. So we know this individual's committed to the mission. We know he wants to be involved in the community. We know our work is consistent with his values. We think we've got a home run. We might not, but we think we've done a good job. So questions about that, because if you're not onboarding well, you have a greater opportunity to onboard the wrong person.
Robbie, I have a question. So you actually put them through their board orientation before you actually make them a board member?
Typically, yes, unless we've got, and this is an interesting question because we have 3 people who joined the board in January who were identified by last October. So they shadowed a meeting. They were actually elected in December, and we did their orientation after. But we, in this particular case, we absolutely will, because we don't want somebody to come on the board who's not fully up to speed.
Yeah, it's a lot of time that people are putting into that training before they're actually a board member. I mean, does anyone ever drop out after they've been oriented?
Yes, when they
Really?
find it's not a good fit, absolutely.
Interesting.
And that's
Okay.
all right. I'd rather have someone say, this isn't my thing, than pretend it's their thing and essentially be an empty seat.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, thanks.
Part of your question, I think, I just want to make a comment. Chairing the governance committee, being on the governance committee is a year-round thing. It's not a 1 quarter and then we're done thing. So if you think about it that way, yes, it is a lot of time. But if you're not putting the right people on the board in the right way, you're sabotaging yourself. Thanks for your question, Ellen. Other comments, feedback, pushback, complaints, anything at all? All right, so this is my favorite book. Governance as Leadership takes what I believe are all the elements of all the best governance models and synthesizes it into one new volume. Now, this new volume, quote new, was published in 2005. I know in research years that's ancient history. But I also believe, because it integrates all of the governance models in the sector, it is so valuable, it is so relevant. So what Chait, Ryan, and Taylor say is boards have to function in 3 different modes. Fiduciary, not financial, fiduciary. My paraphrase of that is we can pay all our bills and we're in compliance with everything we need to be in compliance with. Strategic, my paraphrase is we are best in class in our space. Generative is this board is constantly scanning the horizon. They are empowering their staff to constantly scan the horizon. And we know, or we think we know, what our sector might need 10 years from now. And in addition to being best in class today, we're making sure that everything we do allows us to effectively serve the consumers who depend upon us 5 years, 7 years, 10 years from now. So boards have to be able to move between these modes continuously. So if you were the most amazing generative board on the planet, in March of 2020, you had to snap to fiduciary to keep everybody safe and pay the bills. So I think this is an extremely powerful model.
Robbie,
So yes,
there's a question in the chat. I'm not exactly sure if it was on this page or the page before, so I apologize. But is this process different for the early stages of a startup?
I believe no, but I believe in the early stages of a startup, if you haven't been strategic to think about your core work and how to have a competitive advantage in your sector, and obviously how you're going to pay the bills of your startup, then you've missed some of the core accountabilities. Thanks, Hugh. So if you look at this, there are 3 different roles: oversight, foresight, and insight. And none of these are micromanaging. Oversight and micromanagement are not the same. So if you do a deep dive into governance as leadership, in my opinion, it's one of the most powerful books you will ever read as a nonprofit leader, whether you're staff or volunteers. So why would you think about doing this? How many board meetings have you been to where you sit and listen to somebody report on what they got done last month or the month before? You don't leverage the amazing skills, abilities, and interests of your board as a high power think tank when all they're doing is listening. So if you move to generative governance, and if you align your board with best practice, so you're using a consent agenda and freeing up time for due diligence discussions, you engage their collective minds, you really marshal all of their talent. And to go back to Vincent's question, they're a whole lot more excited about what they're doing because they get to engage with each other, and the performance of the board is better and the performance of the organization is better. We could do a whole half day on the governance as leadership model, so I will stop here. But I really urge you, if you're looking at, are we a traditional board where we listen to a lot of reports and approve a lot of things and go home, this model might be really powerful for you. So building a competent board, and obviously boards have to function within the legal structure. They are in charge of mission, vision, and purpose and strategic planning, monitoring, that's the oversight piece, money, and protecting all of your assets, your brand and reputation, and the CEO hiring and evaluation. So the ensuring legal and ethical integrity, that's the business baseline. And everything you do has to safeguard the nonprofit. So when you think about the duty of loyalty, the duty of obedience, the duty of care, obviously you have to make good decisions in good faith in the best interest of the nonprofit, not in your own best interest. So looking at number 1, the duty of faith, duty of care, duty of loyalty, informed judgments, nothing where you are enriching yourself. This is where having a really good conflict of interest policy, which is essential in my opinion, reminds people annually, oh yeah, right, I didn't join this board so that my business can get contracts. I joined this board to advance the mission of this organization in the community. If there's ever a situation where this is in question, the board has to be willing to call each other out and also to get really good legal advice if they have a deep concern. I believe it's possible for board members to have a professional relationship with the organization on whose board they sit. but you have to have a really tight conflict of interest policy. You have to declare those conflicts of interest, and you have to make sure that whatever bidding and vetting process is separate from that individual's participation and influence. It's easier to simply say never, but in some cases, there may be reasons why you do that. So also, of course, making sure that you're in compliance with every law and regulation. And of course, that's fiduciary accountability and Ryan and Taylor's model.
Robbie,
So how do you build? Yep.
just this may be a little bit out of order, but so either visit it now or a little bit later. But a comment is that I'm a big fan of a consent agenda. May want to explain exactly what that means for others.
I promise if I have time at the end, I will.
Okay.
And if I don't, you remind me. I have a thing I've developed on how to use a consent agenda. I'll email it to you and you can share it with the group.
Happy to. Great.
And then I'm happy to talk to anyone about that.
Okay.
So how do you build a competent board? How do you look at all of the skills, abilities, interests, and attributes that you need? And how do you make sure that you've got the right balance? And if you look here at the array, again, it's not a continuum. It's all going on at the same time. So the governance accountabilities, finance, fundraising, community outreach, strategic planning, but all of these other areas, it doesn't mean you don't participate. You influence, you add your insights, you add your expertise. But again, there's a difference between advising and micromanaging. There's a difference between partnering and playing gotcha. And if you're going to partner in a dignified and effective way, you're going to be traveling the same lane together. And if somebody's in the breakdown lane, you're not going to drive by and diss them. You're going to help them with whatever the problem is. So if your organization is struggling with community outreach or advocacy or marketing, and you have that expertise, be a partner. Be a partner, not a critic. So governance is policy formation. It's also, governance is also fundraising and resource development and advising on the other key areas of accountability. And in small organizations in particular, board members are going to wear more than one hat. So I'll use myself as an example with the housing partnership. I joined the board. They had never used a fundraising CRM. Well, I've been doing fundraising since 1983. I've used a bunch of CRMs. They chose one. I am the volunteer working with our executive assistant on data entry. Is that governance? Of course not. It's operational volunteering. And I know the difference between the two. And I'm very happy to work with our executive assistant on the CRM and the data and setting up letters and constituency codes and all the things. But I realize that doesn't, quote, get me off the hook for doing governance. So sometimes, especially in a small agency, you may wear both hats, but know the difference in the hat. So the governance committee, this is where, in my opinion, the board is either strong, average, or weak. Every board has to figure out, what do we have and what do we need? What are the things that we need to add to improve the way we work? Are there skill sets we don't need? Are there skill sets we have too much of? Are there skill sets we really need that we don't have? Are the documents up to date? Our board position description? Is the committee structure accurate? Do we have a conflict of interest statement, a whistleblower policy, a code of ethics? Do we ask board members to estimate their financial commitment to the organization every year? Are we asking everyone to suggest names of individuals who might become members of committees, members of the board, or perhaps a council of expert advisors? Are we doing annual evaluations in a way that are assessing the correct things and benchmarking year over year? Do we have a good orientation process? Do we have board education? And have we asked the board to give input on the things they would like to know more about? Are we identifying ways for past board members to stay engaged with us? Especially if you have robust fundraising, as board members rotate off, you don't want to have the people who had relationships with your past board members suddenly disappear because that board member is no longer involved. So if you've got all the documents in order, as number 9 says, what are the things that you're asking them to sign every single year? And are there conflicts of interest that need to be declared? Nominating is merely one task of the governance committee. It is not the only task. And if your board still has a nominating committee, look at whether that is really the body count committee. You know, we've got the annual meeting in 6 weeks and we've got 5 empty seats, or is it a subset of what they're doing? I've worked with some organizations where it's actually 2 separate committees, which at least somebody's thinking about it. But how can the nominating committee work in a vacuum from the governance committee if in fact the governance committee is doing the right things? So building a competent board, analyzing, maintaining continuous lists. There are people you may vet who would love to join you, but at this moment can't. So are you maintaining essentially a list of people who are warm leads, but not yet available to you? The one that's harder to maintain with dignity and confidentiality is, are there people you vetted who you really feel would not fit the culture and the role of this particular board? You certainly don't want a board that has groupthink. So the fact that someone may not align with you doesn't necessarily mean they would be a negative voice. But once in a while, you meet someone who you know has motives that are not consistent with moving the mission forward. And you may actually want to keep an analog list of people you've interviewed and vetted and declined to invite. You're going to have to manage that on a case-by-case basis, but I worked for an organization supporting the governance committee where the CEO had such a list. You certainly want the governance committee to be looking at all of the potential candidates and making sure you are keeping a good, robust list to develop your bench. As you're bringing people on, the board chair, who typically has the responsibility of appointing committees, the governance committee will advise the board chair on that. And the governance committee obviously is responsible for maintaining good officer succession. Sometimes you've got a speed bump if somebody loses a job or takes a new position, but ideally, in my opinion, anybody who joins a board should have the skills to be an officer. Doesn't mean they all will, but hopefully you'll have a wide selection. The third duty is strategic planning. And obviously we could spend an entire session on strategic planning. And the comment I'll make about this is the fact that the strategic plan is the responsibility of a board often comes as a shock to them. They think the staff has to develop the strategic plan. No, the board does. And this goes back to most of us don't get to develop strategy in our day jobs, so we aren't comfortable doing it. Strategic planning with an external facilitator is always, in my opinion, a better outcome. But not every board has the capacity to do that. But if you're looking at your mission, vision, and values, who's your target market? What are your strategic imperatives over the next decade? And what goals fit into those? And then what are the objectives and action steps? The action steps, some for the board and others for the staff. This is everybody's favorite, making sure you you're using the money well. And this is the one that I think a lot of board members, when they join a board, if they're not fully informed, they really think this is the primary focus of the board. Reviewing the cash flow statements every month, making sure the assets are strong, making sure if you've got physical assets like a building that they're well maintained, looking at purchasing policies, all of those things. Yeah, that's part of fiscal oversight, and it's a significant role, but it is in that fiduciary level 1 governance, and it is certainly not the only accountability. The budget is a policy document. So when the board approves the budget, they are approving a policy document. If a staff knows that the budget needs to change, that needs to go back through the finance committee, back to the full board. Staff don't get to change budgets without board input. And board members approve policies. Financial procedures then are the way staff administer those policies. So do you have all of those fiscal policies? And then beyond that, another fiduciary accountability, of course, is making sure you have enough insurance and you have disaster policies, and cybersecurity being even more top of mind for a lot of people now. But this is the accountability that fits within that fiscal level 1. The 990 form, I work with boards on board governance, and when they do a self-evaluation, typically the self-evaluation metric that is scored the lowest is, I know what the 990 is, and the board has seen and approved it. Well, I would suspect everyone on this call, you've presented the 990 to your board. The board has seen it, but they don't remember that they've done it. So I think when you look at the IRS 990 form that you're filing along with your audit, make sure they understand what it is and why you're doing it, and how consumers, potential donors, their advisors can find your 990. And of course, GuideStar Candid is where anyone can find any 990 form, but why make them look? Put a link on your website. Make it easy and transparent. And of course, GuideStar also has their transparency ratings. And if your organization isn't yet doing that, that is a way of improving the integrity of your brand by making sure your GuideStar rating is as high as you can get it. Fundraising, everybody's favorite. Ensuring adequate resources. It doesn't mean the board makes sure the staff gets enough money. This is one where everybody's in the same lane together. So what are major donors, and quite frankly, every donor looking for? That you're in compliance with everything you need to be in compliance with. In Pennsylvania, of course, the Attorney General through the Bureau of Charities, you need to be registered as a 501c3 if you're doing fundraising. Federal 501c3 is not enough in Pennsylvania. The only state in our immediate area that doesn't have charities registration is Delaware. So basic compliance means you're in good standing with everything. Is your performance good? Do you have the available funds to serve your constituents with excellence? I have never worked with a board who wanted average to below average service. So if you're not fully leveraging philanthropy as a revenue stream, why not? In my opinion, because you probably don't have a robust board staff partnership to do that. And it's scary. This goes back to I didn't grow up knowing how to be a board member. I didn't grow up knowing how to engage in conversation about philanthropy. All of us can learn that. But somebody has to be brave enough to put up their hand and say, I need to take the lessons. So when you're looking at funding your mission, who are you serving? What are the programs? What are your excellent outcomes? And then with whom can you develop strong relationships? Individuals foundations, corporations are all part of your philanthropy perspective constituency. Who is governing your board? Who is staffing your organization? Individual donors and funders care about that. What is the performance of your staff? And what is the performance of your board? How engaged are they? How are you communicating your brand? And how are you communicating that you are good stewards of the money entrusted to you? And the ways in which you can begin to leverage that. Get people in your building if you have one. Make sure your communications are engaging, not just one-way announcements. So the way we want everything to be digital today, the truth is it can't be. Digital and print need to be in partnership, but we need to invest in our brand and branding so that we're not invisible. And as a board, being willing to invest in that can be really a challenge because we're always concerned about the investment in overhead. And we should be, but at the same time, if our brand is invisible, our work will suffer. So be appropriate and don't be apologetic. Interestingly enough, when we begin to do good fundraising, we tend to focus our time on tactics that are very transactional. As soon as we can bridge out of that into high focus relationship-based fundraising, where we're developing high quality relationships with individuals or couples who really treasure our work, our fundraising will begin to be much stronger because the money that we raise, the transactional money we raise, is the most expensive. And they're the smallest gifts. They are things like contributions to Giving Tuesday, participation in events, direct mail, or digital appeals at the end of the year. Relationship-based gifts, those mid-level gifts and major gifts take time to cultivate, but those are the donors who really do care a great deal about us. So the faster we can move from purely transactional to people who are engaged with person-to-person fundraising, the better our work will be. So knowing your purpose and having meaningful relationships with individuals, this is in that strategic level of governance, and it's being best in class. How is your board? How is your staff best in class at engaging with individual fundraising? And from the moment a group decides to do that until it's really humming along well with good training and mentoring, it's probably a 3-year journey at the shortest. So how do you expand and strengthen your brand? Think about, I love the image. Imagine for a moment you've got a beautiful, pristine piece of paper and you crumple the daylights out of it. Well, you can flatten it out again, but it's never going to be the same. So your brand is that beautiful, flat piece of paper. Whenever you have a speed bump, it gets a little bit crumply. If you have a really big speed bump, you may not get over it. So thinking about investing in your brand, making sure you've got your strategic plan on your website, your board list on your website, your 990 on your website, that you're doing really good community engagement events, not all fundraising. Some of them are community engagement educational events. But are you leveraging your brand to the best of your ability? And if you're not, how can you get that into your action plan and into your budget? Hiring, supporting, and monitoring and evaluating the CEO is absolutely the board's responsibility. Some organizations, executive directors or CEOs think the board reports to them. That's not right. It may be the culture of the organization, but it's not correct. And making sure that every board member has an opportunity to participate in the review, making sure that there is an annual review, that there's a conversation about compensation, and that you're comparing your organization with similar organizations in your service area, knowing that you have a compensation philosophy? Do you have a salary and bonus structure? You can certainly have one, but are the benchmarks correct? Are you tying performance, really tying performance to the strategic plan? And if you're not, what happened to separate that? And how can you get that back on track? At the end of the day, if the board doesn't trust the executive director, you are sabotaging that person. And if you come on a board and you recognize that some people are sitting in the room with the idea that my job is to figure out what the ED and the staff are doing wrong, that's not the culture that you want in the boardroom. If you've got a problem to solve, solve it collaboratively. But if you're doing regular updates, quarterly, monthly evaluation to benchmarks, quarterly deeper dive conversations, nothing is going to be a surprise. And if the work of the staff is aligned with the strategic goals and the evaluative process aligns with that, you're going to be able to develop a trusting, transparent, dignified relationship where everyone's skills and abilities are being used to the maximum and nobody's playing gotcha. So when we think about all of the things that you typically do as a minimum, oversee and direct all the affairs of the nonprofit, long-term planning, and those are, of course, marketing, finance, board development, budgeting, all of those pieces. Day to day, that's the executive director and the staff. Longer range, that's the board. Understanding and promoting the organization. This is your branding work. This is you as the advocate. So whatever your duties are, does your board position description effectively and accurately list the minimum of what's expected from someone? So a sample here: attend the quarterly 2-hour board meeting and actively participate in governance. If you miss 3 meetings in a year, you're gone. Now, certainly, somebody misses 1 meeting, you're going to reach out to them and ask why. Not in an accusatory way, but in a caring way. If you have an excused absence process where people let you know in advance that they can't be there, it's much more proactive. You are counseling the board chair and the executive director. You are supporting events and contributing your time and money. It's not an or, it's an and. You are making a gift that is individually significant for you. I'll say I am not a fan of minimum gift levels, because if you want a truly diverse board with constituents that reflect your entire bandwidth, giving capacity is not going to be the same for everyone. So I like at the housing partnership, what we say with our new board members is, and this is before they're elected and onboarded, of course, when you join our board, we want you to be able to think that within 2 years of serving on the board, we will be in the top 3 priorities for you and your family philanthropically. Maybe not in year 1, but by year 2. So that if people who knew your personal circumstances knew the level of your gift, they would be able to stand back and say, this must be really important to him or her or them. So are you able to do that and get those words out of your mouth during recruitment? Because then if people join, they probably behave like that. Are you willing to put the nonprofit in your estate plan? And can you imagine if you started a planned giving program and every single sitting board member was already a member of your planned giving society? That'd be a pretty powerful statement. Evaluate the board annually, evaluate your executive director or CEO annually, and serve on at least 1 board committee. I worked with an organization where the CEO believed board members should have a whole year before they had to be on a committee. If somebody's got a 3-year term, why would you waste the first year of their talent by not putting them on a committee? So I'm a fan of of getting them on a committee right away. And in sometimes they serve on a committee before they even serve on the board. So if in your organization, you're looking at what is the right path for us today, you can't start everything simultaneously. But if you've got things where you know you've got a deficiency, perhaps focus on that one or two. And as you move through looking at all of the roles and responsibilities of boards, making sure everything is aligned with best practice. So I'm going to stop the share unless somebody wants me to go back to something I already passed. Anything, Hugh, in the chat that I didn't stop for?
No,
I don't see.
no.
All
Robbie,
right,
I have a
well,
question.
okay.
Who do you think is the best person to solicit board members for their donation?
The board chair,
Why not the CEO?
because the board chair is the board member's peer.
But they may not want to share any particular confidential information with the board chair.
They don't necessarily have to. You asked who should solicit.
Mhm.
I think the board chair should solicit. It doesn't mean the gift has to go through the board chair, but I think the solicitation originates with the board chair.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And that may seem like a distinction without a difference, but I understand your comment. And I'm the governance committee chair of the housing partnership. I've already told you that. When we have our first meeting of the year, the board members sign 5 documents. They sign the board position description. They sign the confidentiality statement. They sign the code of ethics, and they sign the whistleblower policy. Those are mandatory for us. We also ask them to give us an estimate of their annual contribution. And I, as the governance committee chair, stalk them until we get the 4. The estimate of contribution is voluntary, but we get them all because we've told them in advance that we're going to ask them that. So I think the more transparent you are with why this is important, we're not going to go to a funder or a major gift prospect and say, well, we got about 1/3 of our board giving, but you know, we're trying. In my opinion, that's not enough. Even when we have people, we don't currently have someone on our board with lived experience. We did, and he got married and decided being a husband for a while was more important to him than serving on the governing board with us. But we're in the process of working on that. But even someone, and in the housing partnership, of course, we're working with under-resourced individuals to be able to be first-time home buyers. So he doesn't have a lot of money. And of course, he just got married. But he could make a meaningful contribution for him, and he knew in advance that we were going to ask him to do that. So asking and collecting are 2 different tasks. I'm happy to go back to Vincent's comment about consent agendas unless there are other urgent questions right now. I don't see any hands up. So a consent agenda basically is you have your business agenda. When you have a good consent agenda, every single committee chair has written an update. And the update will focus on the work you're currently doing and the work you anticipate you will be doing. You foreshadow motions that may be coming to the board, but you never put a motion in a consent agenda because motions have to be acted on individually. So again, and I'm using myself as an example, in our governance committee consent agenda, we will have individuals that we've reached out to in due diligence conversations, people who have been recommended to us in part because we want to know if anyone knows those people who might be a better connector to them than someone on the governance committee. We also report to them which documents we're working on. So our board just adopted a brand new revision of all of the officer position descriptions We developed a position description for committee members who were not also board members, and we redid all the charters of all of our committees. So they knew 3 months ago we were working on that. They knew when they were going to get for first reading, and then they got it at our last meeting for action. So they get all the information about what we've done in writing. So I don't have to stand up in a meeting and explain to them what we've been doing. When all of those materials are on your consent agenda, the finance committee, the programs committee, the audit committee, the governance committee, a marketing task force, then when a board votes to approve the consent agenda, what they are doing is saying, yes, I admit that I got this information. Yes, I knew I was accountable for reading it. Yes, I did. Now, if a board member is concerned about something they've read and thinks it rises to the level where the full board ought to think about it and talk about it, any board member has the right to pull any report off the consent agenda and move it to discussion. But if you've done a good job explaining it, that rarely happens. But it does, and it should from time to time. Vincent, did I speak to that enough? I know you
Yep.
said you're a fan.
Yep, that was
Okay.
perfect. Thank you.
We have 3 minutes left. I'm happy to take more questions or pushback or feedback or whatever's on your mind.
You mentioned a whistleblower policy for the board.
Yep.
Obviously, there's one for the staff, but you think every board should have a whistleblower policy for the board as well?
We signed the same one.
It's on the same one. Okay.
And it's not, we get funding through HUD, and HUD requires the conflict of interest policy, which of course any board should have. HUD does not require the board to sign the whistleblower policy, but we think it's a strong statement about our commitment. So we sign it as well. And
Okay.
we've also developed an organizational code of ethics.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have 2 minutes left. Anybody else with a question? Comment?
Simple question. This is my first time joining y'all. Will you send out this recording afterwards?
Yes, the Robbie's presentation will be available on the foundation's website. So just search for it under workshops. It may be under Get on Board, but just search for it. If you can't find it, I'm on the website. Just email me and I'll tell you exactly where it is. But the presentation and a recording of this session will be on our website.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for your time
If
today,
you
Rob. You
decide-
did
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just said you did a great job. Thank you. It was very informative.
Oh, thank you, Pam.
All right, well, very good.
I'm very happy to get questions from anybody, and my I think my website's on your PowerPoint, but not my email address, I guess, Hugh.
So how about can you just type it quickly in the chat so that people can see it?
Of course,
Copy
I'll
it
put
to
it in.
everybody.
But if you decide to email me, do me a favor. Put in the subject that it's a question from the Community Foundation conversation, because if I don't recognize your email, I may not open it. Because like you, I'm always afraid of getting my computer eaten alive by something that is evil. But I'm very happy to take questions if you have them.
All right, well, I'm going to stop the recording. And I do want to thank everybody.